Hello friends, welcome to the section 2 of this course. In the first lecture of section 2, we'll move on to the basics of a percentage of b, and this section is all about calculating a percentage of a number, a percentage of b. Now, before we move on to the shortcuts over here, we'll have to focus on two facts, two very simple facts. The first fact is 10% of a number is one decimal to the left. That is, any number's 10% is just one decimal to the left. And 1% of any number is two decimals to the left. That is one more decimal to left once we have calculated 10%. Allow me to elaborate. Let's take an example. Let's take an example of a number 540. Now, just like any other number, 540 is 100% of itself. Any number is always 100% of itself. So is 540. So 540 is 100% of itself. Whereas 10% of the number is 54. See, as discussed in the last lecture of section 1, we took an imaginary decimal over here. Let's say 540 is an integer. So I can take this number as 540.0. So there is an imaginary decimal over here. I'll just move that decimal place one place to the left and I'll get 10%. That is 54. Very simple. And 1% of the number can still be obtained by taking the decimal another place to the left. That is 2 places from the start and another place to the left once we have obtained 10%. So 100% of the number 540 is 540, of course. 10% of the number will be 54, one decimal to the left, and 1% will be 5.4, another decimal to the left. That is 2 decimals from the start. Now, what is the use of this? Why are we taking it specially? Let's see. See, if I have 100%, which I already have because the number is given to me, I can easily calculate 200%, which is doubling 540 to get the answer as 1080, or 500%, which is multiplying this 540 by 5, and I'll get the answer as 2700. So these are all the applications of 100%, but we generally don't come across these kind of percentage that often. Now, but the next part, that is 10% being equal to 54, will be really handy over here. See, if I have 10%, I can easily calculate 5% by just dividing the 10%, whatever 10% is, by 2. That is, I'll obtain 5% as 27, almost instantaneously in my head. Similarly, if I divide this 5% again by 2, I'll get the 2.5%, which is half of 27 in this case, which is 13.5. So you see, if I have 10%, I can just divide that 10% by 2 to obtain 5% very easily. Once I get 5%, I can divide 5% by 2 to get 2.5% very easily. Now, what is the use of 5%, 2.5% or 10%? We'll deal with this in few seconds. But right now, the fact that you will focus on is that if I have 10%, I can calculate 5%, 2.5% very easily. And not only 5 and 2.5%, I can move on further as well. For example, if I have 10%, I can calculate 20% very easily. Like 20% will be nothing but double of 10%, which is double of 54, which is 108. Similarly, 40% will be 4 times 10%, which is 4 times 54 in this case, which will be 216. We'll take it in an elaborative way just in few seconds. But again, 10% would be very handy. And the beauty of this method is that we don't have to calculate 10%. I can see 10% if a number is given to me. Doesn't matter how complicated the number is. I can just see the 10%. I don't have to calculate it. Similarly, if I move on to 1%, 1% is 5.4. Using this 1%, I can move on to 2%, which is 10.8, or 3%, which is 3 into 5.4, which will come out to be 16.2 with some easy multiplication over here, or 8%, which is 8 times 5.4%, which is 43.2. Now, just to bring into your notice that 8% is just an explanation for 1%, but the easier method of calculating 8% would be to reduce 2% from 10%. That is, if I have 2% as 10.8, just subtract 10.8 from the 10%, I'll land upon 8%, which is 43.2. But just to explain, I have just taken 8% and I have taken the help of 1% to calculate it. Now, This is what is the basic. I just take an example over here and I have explained the basics. Now, how are we going to use this? We will have to see once we do these kind of calculations real time. So let's see. Okay, let's take a number. Let's take a number as a number 240. Now, just for the sake of practice, we'll see. 10% of the number will be one decimal to the left, that is 24. 20% of the number will be double of 24 basically, that is 48. 30% of the number will be triple of 24, that is 72. 40% of the number is, again, either you multiply 24 by 4 or you double 48, because 20% double of 20% will be 40%. Either ways I'll obtain the answer is 96. Similarly, 50% can be calculated, which is nothing but half, or we can see it like 24 into 5, 10% into 5 as 120%. So you see, all the percentages which are multiples of 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 are easily obtainable. Even if I just see the number, let's say the number is 240, I can just see the 10% of the number as 24, triple it to get 30% instantaneously as 72. Multiplied by 4 to get 96 as 40% instantaneously. So, calculating these percentages won't be difficult. In fact, calculating percentages which are greater than 50 would actually be easier than calculating the percentages which are lesser than 50. For example, let's say 60% of this number. Let's say I have to calculate 60% of this number. Now, there are two ways. Either I multiply 24 by 6 because 24 is 10%. I multiply 10% by 6, I'll get the answer as 60%. Or I'll do this in my mind. Or I can just visualize this in my mind. As I said at the beginning of this course, visualization will be absolutely required. So this will go in my mind. That is, in my mind, I'll quickly break 60% into 50 and 10%. Now 50% is very easy. Half of the number, that is 120. 10% is even easier. I can just add 10% to it to get to the answer as 144. Now, beauty is all this thing will go inside my mind within a couple of seconds, if I'm not wrong, because 60% I can see it as 50% and 10% within a fraction of a second. 50% I can see 120, half. 10%, 24 I can also see. Need not to calculate anything over here. What I need to do is just to add these two numbers, which can be done in a couple of seconds. So this thing will not take that much of a time. Maximum 5 to 6 seconds, I think. Because this anyways will be faster than 60 by 100 into 250. Right? So let's see 70% as well. Now 70% can also be obtained in the same way. Either I multiply 7 to 24, which is 10%, or I break it up into two parts. One is 50% and the other one is 20%. Now 50% need not to calculate it. We can halve the number as 120. And 20% we have already seen, or we can easily calculate it as 48 on the spot. And I'll get the answer as 168. Isn't it? Similarly, 80%, either we multiply 8 to our 10%, or we can do it like this. 80% will be equal to 50% plus 30%. Even 90%. 90 can be seen as 50% plus 40%. Neither of which are difficult to calculate, because 10%, rather 50% is half of the number, which is 240 is half, which is 120. 40% is nothing but 10 times 4 times 10%, which is 24, which will be 96. And I'll obtain the answer as 216. See? So all these percentages which are ending in 0 would be very, very easy to calculate once we have 10% in our mind. The only thing that we need to use over here is this 10% is one decimal to the left. That is 10% in this case is 24. Okay, before wrapping up, I just want to ask one question. Can you think of a smarter way to calculate 90%? In fact, there is a smarter way to calculate 90%. Let me write it over here. 90% can not only be taken as 50% plus 40%, it can also be taken as 100% minus 10%. That is, I am taking out 10% from my 100% of the number and I am left with 90%. Now this is much more easier, isn't it? Because 100% of the number we already know the number as 240 and 10% is 24. So I just subtract 24 from 240 to obtain the answer as 216, isn't it? So the same thing can be applied to 80%, I believe, because 80% will be 100% minus 20%. Even can be scaled to 70% if you want to, because whichever way you find it comfortable for you. You find it comfortable to do 50% plus 20%, be my guest, go ahead with this one, or go ahead with 100% minus 30%. Personally speaking, I like this method much better for 70%, 50% plus 20%. Whereas 80 can be calculated like this and 90 certainly can be calculated like this very easily. So you see, there's always a shortcut present. There's always a shortcut present, as I mentioned at the beginning of this course. You really have to believe that statement if you have to see the shortcut. If you don't believe that statement, it'll be difficult for you to see the shortcut. So with that statement in mind, we'll move on to the next lecture on a% of b, in which we'll see how can we calculate all those percentages which are ending in 5 very, very easily. Let's see.